I was 25 years old, standing on a rusted iron bridge at the edge of my small city, watching the river slide away beneath me. It was late evening, and the sky was bruised with shades of orange and violet. The world around me seemed quiet, but my mind was loud, too loud. I had been working at the same dead-end job for 6 years, earning enough to survive but never enough to live. I had friends, but none who truly knew me. I had dreams, but they were dusty boxes I had pushed into the darkest corners of my mind. I had energy once, fire, ambition, but that had been swallowed by the daily routine of wake, work, eat, sleep, repeat. My life was a clock, ticking away, but I wasn't moving anywhere. That night on the bridge, I saw something strange. A man in a faded suit, sitting on the railing, legs swinging above the dark water. He looked older, maybe in his 50s, but there was something young in his eyes. "Beautiful evening," he said, without looking at me. I nodded, unsure if I should walk away or stay. Something about him kept me there. "You know," he continued, "most people think life is long. They think they can waste years, and they'll still have enough left to do something great. But they're wrong. Life's not long, it's just wide. And most people never cross it." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He finally looked at me, and I could see the faint lines of both joy and regret on his face. "I mean, people confuse existing with living. They think waking up, going to work, paying bills, eating, and sleeping is living. But that's just the bare minimum. Living is doing the thing you do even if it scared you. Living is giving more than you take. Living is doing something that will outlast you." I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. Something in his voice made me feel as if he was speaking directly to the parts of me I had been ignoring. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pocket watch. "My father gave me this when I turned 18. He said, 'This watch will remind you that your time is always running.'" I didn't listen. I thought I had forever. Now I'm 54, and I've learned the most painful truth: time doesn't slow for anyone. He clicked the watch shut, stood, and stepped down from the railing. "If you keep waiting for the right time, you'll die waiting. The right time is always now." With that, he walked past me and disappeared into the deepening shadows of the street. I stood there, the sound of the rushing water below mixing with the ticking of my own heart. Something inside me shifted that night. I went home and sat in my dark apartment, staring at the ceiling, hearing his words over and over. The right time is always now. For years, I had been telling myself I'd start later. Later I'd travel. Later I'd build my own business. Later I'd write that book. But later had been stealing my years, one quiet day at a time. That night, I made a promise to myself, would not waste the rest of my life. I would chase the things that mattered, even if they scared me. I would burn the bridges to my excuses. I would live, not just exist. It was only the beginning, but it was the first time in years that I felt alive. 3 weeks after meeting the man on the bridge, I still couldn't shake his words. I'd started making small changes, waking up earlier, cutting down on the hours I wasted scrolling on my phone, reading books I had always said I'd read someday. But deep down, I knew these were just warm-up steps. The real change had to be bigger, heavier, and permanent. One rainy Sunday afternoon, I decided to take a walk through the park near my apartment. The rain was light, just enough to paint the paths silver, and the air smelled clean, like the city had just been washed. On a bench under a huge oak tree sat an old woman with a notebook in her lap. She was dressed in a long, faded green coat, and her silver hair was tied into a loose bun. She was writing quickly, her eyes moving between the paper and the gray sky as if she was racing against time. I don't know why, but I stopped. "What are you writing?" I asked. She looked up and smiled faintly. "A list of things I regret." I didn't know what to say. People usually hide their regrets, lock them away in silence. She must have noticed my hesitation because she gestured to the bench. "Sit. You look like someone who could use this lesson." I sat down. She turned the notebook toward me, and I saw a long list of sentences, some short, some stretching across the page like they were too heavy to contain. I read a few. "I regret never telling him I loved him. I regret working 20 extra years for a company that forgot my name after I left. I regret not taking that train to the coast when I was 25. I regret waiting for permission to be happy." She closed the notebook and looked straight into my eyes. "I'm 71. I've had enough time to understand this. Regrets don't come from the things you did. They come from the things you didn't do. The conversations you didn't start. The dreams you didn't chase. The risks you didn't take." Her voice was steady, but I could see the weight in her gaze. "Do you want to know the worst part?" she asked. I nodded. "You don't feel the regret while you're making the choice. You feel it years later, when it's too late to fix it. Regret is a slow poison, it takes its time, and by the time you realize it's killing you, it's already too deep." The rain began to fall harder, and she tucked the notebook into her coat. She stood up slowly, leaning on a wooden cane. "You're young," she said, her voice suddenly sharp. "Don't wait until you're my age to understand this. Don't waste your life thinking you have unlimited chances. Every choice you avoid is a door you lock forever." Then she walked away, vanishing into the misty rain. I sat there, my clothes damp, my mind on fire. I thought about the book I wanted to write, the places I wanted to see, the people I wanted to love deeply but had kept at a safe distance. I thought about the safe path I had chosen because it was easy, not because it was right. When I got home, I opened my own notebook and wrote at the top of the first page, "Things I'll regret if I don't do them." And for the first time in my life, I wrote them all down without lying to myself. The list was long. Too long. And I swore to myself that one by one, I would cross them off, not by avoiding them, but by living them. 2 months had passed since I'd met the man on the bridge and the woman in the park. Their words were like seeds in my mind, at first small, almost hidden, but now they were growing fast, pushing against everything I thought I knew about life. I had been working at the same office for years, moving numbers around spreadsheets, answering emails that meant nothing, drinking coffee just to stay awake until the day ended. I wasn't living, I was marking time like a prisoner scratching days on a cell wall. One Wednesday afternoon, I sat at my desk staring at the glowing computer screen when it hit me, this was my map. This office, this job, this apartment, this routine, it was the map of my life. A map that led only in circles. A map designed for safety, not adventure. And suddenly, I didn't want that map anymore. That night, I printed a photo of a world map and pinned it to the wall above my bed. I stared at it, tracing lines with my eyes, imagining all the places I'd never been. Places I'd always told myself I'd see one day. Then I took a black marker and drew an X over my city. I pulled my notebook from the drawer, the one with the list of things I'd regret not doing, and I flipped to the first page. The top item read, "Quit the job that's killing my spirit." It was almost midnight. I took a lighter from my kitchen drawer, flicked it open, and held the flame near the corner of the paper map on the wall. For a moment I hesitated. This was my plan, my structure, my sense of security. But then I remembered the man's words, "The right time is always now." The paper caught fire. I watched the edges curl and blacken, the flames licking across continents I had never seen. The smell of burning paper filled the room, and ash drifted to the floor like dark snow. I didn't stop it. I didn't put it out. I let the whole thing burn until only scraps remained. I wasn't burning the idea of travel. I was burning the idea that I had to follow the safe path laid out for me. The next morning, I walked into the office, heart pounding. My boss barely looked up from his screen when I handed him my resignation letter. "You're sure about this?" he asked. Yes, I said. I'm done following this map. He didn't understand. He didn't have to. By the end of the week, I was unemployed, standing in my small apartment surrounded by boxes. Most of what I owned was junk, clothes I didn't wear, books I'd never read, gadgets I didn't need. I donated most of it. Every item I gave away felt like cutting a rope that had been tying me down. One night, with almost everything packed, I sat on the bare floor, eating noodles straight from the pot. I should have felt scared. I should have felt lost. But I felt free. The map was gone. The future was wide open. The only thing I had now was my list of regrets, and the determination to erase every single one before time erased me. The morning after I left my job, the city felt different. The same streets, the same buildings, the same people, but I was no longer moving along with them. I was outside the flow, standing still while everyone else rushed to work with paper cups of coffee in their hands and tired lines on their faces. I didn't have a detailed plan. All I had was a notebook full of things I didn't want to regret, a little bit of savings, and a promise I had made to myself on the bridge that night. The first thing on my list after quitting my job was simple: see the ocean before my next birthday. It was strange to think that in 25 years of life, I had never stood at the edge of the sea. I booked a one-way bus ticket to the coast. I didn't tell anyone. Not because I was hiding, but because I didn't want their doubts to be louder than my decision. The bus ride took 6 hours. I watched the city dissolve into open fields, the fields give way to low hills, and finally, the first glimmer of silver water on the horizon. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with the feeling that I was finally moving towards something real. When the bus stopped, the air was different. Salt. Wind. The constant hush and roar of something alive. I walked through narrow streets until I found a path between two dunes, and then I saw it. The ocean stretched forever, restless and endless. The waves rolled in like they had been doing for thousands of years, not caring who watched. The sky above was enormous, the kind that makes you feel small in the best possible way. I took off my shoes and stepped onto the cold, wet sand. When the first wave touched my toes, I felt like a child again, like I had discovered magic. I walked until the water reached my knees, and I let it pull at me, daring me to go farther. I thought of the man on the bridge. I thought of the old woman and her notebook of regrets. And I thought of the map I had burned. This, I whispered to myself, is the first leap. That night, I found a cheap hostel by the harbor. My room smelled faintly of salt and wood. I shared it with 3 strangers who were traveling through the country, backpacks by the door, sunburns on their faces, stories in their eyes. Over dinner, they told me about their journeys. One had been cycling from village to village for months. Another had been living out of her van, following the seasons. The third had quit medical school to travel the world. They didn't talk about promotions, deadlines, or retirement plans. They talked about sunsets in cities I'd never heard of, mountains so high they stole your breath, and people they'd met who had changed their lives. I realized I was surrounded by people who had already done what I was just beginning, people who had chosen living over existing. When I went to bed, the waves outside my window kept rolling in and rolling out, as if they were breathing. I thought about how easy it would be to go back to the city in a week, to slide into my old routines. But the sound of the ocean reminded me, that was not why I had leapt. This was only the beginning, and the first leap was never meant to be the last. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The harbor was still wrapped in mist, and the world felt like it was holding its breath. I stood on the pier, hands in my pockets, watching fishing boats drift out toward the open water. Somewhere inside me, a new thought began to take root: if I could leap once, I could leap again. I opened my notebook. The next item on my list was bold, almost arrogant: do something that terrifies me. At the time I wrote it, I didn't know what that would be. Now, Standing there with the scent of salt in my lungs, I knew I would learn to sail. The idea seemed ridiculous. I had never been on a boat bigger than a ferry. But fear was the point. If I was going to stop wasting my life, I couldn't keep choosing what was comfortable. By mid-morning, I found a small sailing school run by a man named Raphael. His skin was weathered like driftwood, his hair wild and sun-bleached. When I told him I wanted to learn, he looked me up and down, smirked, and said, "The ocean is a good teacher. But she's not gentle." The first lesson was chaos. The boat rocked hard, the wind snapped the sail, and every time Raphael shouted a term, "Trim the sheet. Ease the jib." It felt like he was speaking another language. My hands blistered from the ropes. My legs ached from bracing against the deck. More than once, I thought about quitting. But then we hit open water. The wind caught the sail perfectly, and the boat leaned into the speed, slicing through the waves. Spray hit my face, cold and sharp, and for a moment, I felt weightless. I wasn't fighting the ocean anymore, I was moving with it. That night, lying in my narrow hostel bed, I couldn't sleep. My muscles throbbed, my skin was salty and raw, but my mind was electric. I had touched something I hadn't felt in years, fear turning into exhilaration. Over the next 2 weeks, I learned fast. My hands toughened. My balance improved. I began to anticipate the wind before it hit, to read the water like it was a living map. Raphael started trusting me with the tiller for longer stretches. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Raphael leaned beside me at the helm. "You've got the spirit for this," he said. "Not everyone does. Most people want safety. You want the edge." The edge. That was exactly it. I had lived so long in the middle, safe, predictable, numb, that I'd forgotten what it was to chase the line between control and chaos. Sailing taught me something my old life never had: you can't live waiting for perfect conditions. You set your course, and you adapt. You don't beg the wind to change, you learn to work with it. When I finally left the harbor to continue my journey, Raphael shook my hand hard. "The ocean doesn't waste her time," he said. "Neither should you." I walked away with my backpack, my list, and a growing hunger for whatever would push me next. And somewhere deep down, I knew, this hunger could be dangerous. It happened faster than I expected. After leaving the harbor, I took a bus inland to a mountain town I'd only seen in photographs, a place where jagged cliffs cut the sky and the streets smelled of wood smoke. I told myself I'd stay a week, maybe 2. But within days, the town began whispering dangerous ideas into my ear. One evening at a cafe, I met Luca, a wiry Italian with a grin like he was in on a secret no one else knew. He was a climber, one of those people who didn't just hike mountains but hung off them with nothing but a rope and nerve. When I told him I was chasing experiences that scared me, his eyes lit up. "You want fear?" he said, leaning in. "Come with me tomorrow." The next morning, I found myself strapped into a harness at the base of a limestone cliff, staring up at a vertical wall that looked more like the side of a fortress than anything a human should climb. The rock was cold under my fingers, the air thin in my lungs. Halfway up, my arms burned, my breath came ragged, and my mind screamed at me to look down. When I did, the ground felt impossibly far away. My legs trembled. My grip faltered. "Keep moving." Luca's voice echoed from above. But fear had found me again, only this time, it wasn't turning into exhilaration. It was growing, clawing up my spine. My hands slipped once, twice. My stomach dropped each time. When I finally reached the top, my body was shaking, not from the climb, but from the knowledge of how close I'd been to letting go. That night, lying in the small wooden room I'd rented, I felt something I hadn't since leaving the city: doubt. The climb had been incredible, yes, but it had also exposed something I didn't want to admit: my hunger for the edge might push me past the point of safety. The next day, the universe reminded me just how thin that edge could be. Luca and I went out again, this time to a different wall. The weather was clear when we started, but halfway up, clouds rolled in, and the wind began to howl. My fingers went numb. The rock slicked with a fine mist. I was 2 moves from a ledge when my right foot slipped. In an instant, I was falling, the rope snapping tight against my harness, jerking me hard. My breath exploded out of me. My vision went white for a moment. Luca shouted something, but I couldn't hear over the blood pounding in my ears. When we finally reached the ground, I ripped off the harness and sat in the dirt, shaking. I had fallen only a few meters, but it felt like I'd been shown a door I wasn't ready to open. That night, I didn't feel fearless. I felt fragile. I lay awake in the dark, the image of the sky spinning above me burned into my mind. And for the first time since I'd started this journey, I wondered if maybe I had been wrong, maybe chasing the edge meant eventually falling off it. But as the hours passed, a quieter thought pushed its way forward. I had fallen, yes, but I had also gotten back up. And maybe that was the point. The fall stayed with me like a shadow. Even as I left the mountain town behind, its weight followed me on the bus, into new cities, through conversations with strangers. The thrill of the journey was still there, but now it had a sharp edge, a reminder that adventure isn't free. It asks for payment in fear, pain, and sometimes more. I arrived in a crowded coastal city where the air was heavy with heat and the smell of fried food. My plan, if it could be called that, was to stay just long enough to figure out my next move. I found a cheap room above a shop and spent my days wandering narrow streets, watching the chaos of markets, drinking coffee at roadside stalls. It was there that I met Elena. She was a photographer, her camera always hanging from her neck, her eyes always searching. We spoke over coffee one morning, and she told me she was working on a project, capturing people who lived all the way, as she put it. People who had chosen to burn their old lives down and start again. "You fit," she said, smiling. But when she aimed her lens at me, I froze. The smile I gave her wasn't real. And I knew why, because the truth was, I hadn't been living all the way. I'd taken risks, yes, but I'd also been clinging to something invisible. Safety. That afternoon, she showed me her photographs. A fisherman who had sold his boat to build a school. A woman who had left a safe government job to run a tiny bookshop in the mountains. A man who walked away from his family fortune to plant trees in the desert. They all lost something, Elena said, tapping the images. Some lost money. Some lost friends. Some lost comfort. But they gained themselves. That's the trade. That night, her words sat in my head like a stone. What have you actually traded? The truth hit me hard. I had quit my job, yes. I had traveled, tried new things, even scared myself. But I was still holding on to my savings like a lifeline, still keeping a mental door open in case I wanted to crawl back to my old life. I was halfway in, halfway out. And halfway, I realized, is just another kind of wasting your life. The next morning, I took out my notebook. I looked at the list of things I'd regret not doing, and I circled the ones I'd been avoiding because they were too big, too risky, too final. One in particular made my chest tighten. Invest everything I have into something I believe in. I didn't know what that something would be yet. But I knew that until I found it, and threw myself into it completely, I was just pretending to live all the way. I left the cafe where I'd been sitting, stepped into the noise of the street, and made myself a promise. The next chapter of this journey wouldn't be about chasing thrills or ticking off items. It would be about the one leap I couldn't undo. And I knew, even as I felt the fear rising in me, that the moment I found it, would have to jump, no matter the cost. It happened on a blistering afternoon, the kind where the air feels heavy enough to carry voices farther than they should go. I was walking through the far end of the coastal city, away from the tourists and noise, when I stumbled onto a stretch of land by the water. It wasn't beautiful, at least not in the usual way. The sand was littered with broken nets and rusted cans, the water dark and sluggish. On the shore, a group of barefoot children played with sticks, chasing each other between the skeletons of old fishing boats. An old woman sat nearby, sewing a torn net with hands that shook slightly. I asked her about the place. Her name was Amara, and her voice carried the patience of someone who had been telling the same story for years. She explained that this had once been a thriving fishing community, but over time, pollution and neglect had killed the trade. Many of the younger people had left. Those who stayed struggled to survive. As she spoke, something inside me shifted. This was it, the thing I had been waiting for without knowing it. A chance to do something that mattered. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing the rusted boats, the children's bare feet, Amara's shaking hands. And I kept thinking of the line from my notebook, invest everything I have into something I believe in. By morning, the decision was made. I spent the next week talking to locals, learning their needs. The men still knew how to fish, but they lacked working boats and clean nets. The women could sew, mend, and cook, but they had no place to sell their goods. The children went to a crumbling school where books were falling apart. I took every dollar I had left and split it, half for repairing boats and buying new nets, half for building a small open-air market by the shore. It wasn't much, but it was everything I had. When I told Elena, she stared at me. You know this means you're stuck here for a while, right? No more moving on when you get bored. I know, I said. That's the point. The work was exhausting. We hauled wood in the sun until our backs ached. We sanded down old boats, painted them bright blues and reds. We set up stalls for the market, hammering nails late into the night by lantern light. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing an experience for myself. I was building something for others, something that might last after I was gone. Months later, I stood on the same shore, watching the first day of the market. Boats came in heavy with fish. Women sold baskets of fruit, fresh bread, and hand-stitched clothing. Children ran between the stalls, their laughter mixing with the sound of waves. Amara stood beside me, her eyes wet. You gave us back more than boats, she said. You gave us back a reason to stay. I didn't know how to respond. My throat felt tight, my chest full. That evening, as the sun sank into the horizon, I realized something. The man on the bridge had been right. The old woman in the park had been right. The map I burned had been leading nowhere. And now, finally, I had crossed the width of life. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't halfway anymore. This was the point of no return, and I didn't want to return. Because here, standing on this shore, I knew the truth, I hadn't just stopped wasting my life. I had started living it.